For the vast majority of human history, there were no palaces, thrones, or royal families. Our ancestors once lived in relatively small hunter-gatherer groups. Power was usually distributed evenly among the members. An excellent person leading a hunt did not necessarily have the authority to give orders in other matters. But thousands of years later, something very different emerged. A single person could stand above tens of thousands, even millions of people. That person could collect taxes, mobilize armies, enact laws, own massive palaces, and sometimes be declared chosen by the gods themselves. They were called kings, queens, pharaohs, emperors, or by countless other exalted titles. So, why did humans create rulers with such immense power? And why, for thousands of years, did the monarchy become one of the most common forms of government in the world? To answer this question, we need to go back in time. Before kings existed, hunter-gatherer groups usually consisted of only a few dozen to a few hundred people. Everyone knew each other directly. Decision-making was often based on discussion, tradition, or the prestige of experienced members. A skilled hunter might be respected. An older person might have influence, but that did not mean absolute power. More importantly, in these tiny societies, if one person tried to impose dominance, other members could resist, ignore them, or simply leave. The small scale made centralized power very difficult to survive. Then, a revolution changed everything. That was agriculture. More than 10,000 years ago, instead of constantly moving to find food, humans began settling in villages. Agriculture created something extremely important, which was a food surplus. For the first time, a community could produce more food than they needed to consume immediately. Food could be stored. Animals became property. Land became valuable. And once society began accumulating wealth, a core question emerged. Who would control that wealth? Those who held the granaries, water sources, or fertile lands gradually became more powerful than others. This was the very first brick in building the ruling class. But true power only exploded when villages turned into cities. A group of 50 people could resolve conflicts themselves, but a city with tens of thousands of people was completely different. Who would settle disputes? Who would distribute water? Who would protect the granaries? Who would coordinate labor to build dikes and dig canals? When the population skyrocketed, management became incredibly complex. At this point, a centralized power system revealed its absolute advantage. It could make decisions and execute orders on a massive scale. Along with the wealth of cities, another brutal factor appeared. War, fertile land, water sources, food stockpiles, all were things worth plundering. When conflict broke out, a slow debating council would lead the city to its doom. Instead, they needed a strong, decisive military commander. If this commander won continuously, he would control the warriors, control the spoils of war, and control the new lands. Very quickly, military power turned into political power. A wartime leader could absolutely become a permanent ruler. However, relying solely on violence and the army was not enough to maintain the throne from one generation to the next. A king needed a sharper weapon: legitimacy. The people had to have a reason to believe that the king had the legal right to rule them, and the most powerful tool to create this belief was religion. In ancient Egypt, the pharaoh was not just a king, he was a god. In many other places, the king was the son of heaven, the one chosen by the divine. The message delivered was very clear. Obeying the king was not only a political duty, but also a sacred obligation. To rebel against the king was to rebel against heaven and earth. But in reality, a king could not rule alone. The monarchy was not the story of a single individual, but a massive web of power. The king needed officials to collect taxes, soldiers for protection, generals to command, clerics to reinforce belief, and nobles to manage distant lands. To feed this entire machine, the state had to collect taxes. Taxes maintained the army protected the king, and the king used the army to continue collecting taxes. A perfect loop of power was established. Yet a fatal danger always lurked. What would happen when the king passed away? If every time the throne was empty, people slaughtered each other to claim it, the kingdom would collapse from civil war. The solution offered was that the throne must be passed down within the same bloodline. When the king died, his son, daughter, or someone in the royal family would succeed him. The right to rule no longer belonged to a single individual. It became the political property of an entire lineage. The birth of dynasties began from here. At this point, an interesting question is raised. Why was there the appearance of queens? Although many societies favored males due to the association with military power, history still recorded many great female monarchs. Women stepped onto the throne when there was no suitable male heir, when the law allowed it, or simply through intelligence, political alliances, and the support of the elites. This proved that the nature of kingship did not lie in gender, but in who was recognized by the power system. To consolidate invisible power in the eyes of the public, kings and queens used tangible symbols: crowns, thrones, magnificent cloaks, and majestic rituals, all aimed to create a sacred distance between the ruler and the commoners. At the same time, they built monumental structures: pyramids, temples, palaces, the Great Wall. These colossal architectural blocks sent a firm psychological message. If one person could force tens of thousands of people to move millions of tons of stone to build their resting place, then that person clearly possessed an unchallengeable power. So, was kingship born to protect the people? Partly, yes. A centralized government helped reduce conflict, build roads, maintain laws, and coordinate the economy. But that was not the whole picture. Many kings used the power of the entire nation to serve their own greed, exploiting the people with heavy taxes, forced labor, and launching bloody wars. It is also necessary to remember that not all human societies chose to create kings. Many civilizations chose to decentralize power, use councils of elders, or build republican models. A king was not the inevitable result of evolution. It was merely one of many solutions that humans invented to operate gigantic societies. However, once a monarchy was established, it had an intense vitality. Children were born already seeing a king. The law protected the king. Religion praised the king. Over thousands of years, royal power became an obvious part of the world, just like the sun rising in the east. People no longer asked, "Why do we need a king?" but only asked, "Who will be the next king?" It took a very long time for this absolute power to begin to crack. The growing wealth of cities, the rise of the merchant class, and the explosion of knowledge caused humans to question royal authority. Revolutions broke out. A great new idea emerged. The right to rule did not come from bloodlines or gods, but had to come from the people themselves. Today, although many countries still have kings and queens, most of them only play a symbolic role for history and tradition, while true power belongs to elected governments. Looking back at this entire journey, we realize a profound truth. Kingship, in essence, is a great social invention. The crown itself has no power. The golden throne also has no power. A human being, biologically, does not change at all just because they are draped in a royal robe. Their power exists only because we all agree to recognize it. Soldiers obey orders. officials work, and the people comply. The most interesting question in history is perhaps not why did humans create kings and lords, but rather, why did millions of people agree to let a single person stand above them all? Because when we understand how a crown turns an ordinary person into a symbol of an entire nation, we will realize a truth: that the greatest power of humankind does not just come from violence or swords, but it comes from the things that we collectively believe in.